Hi, I'm Tony Alessandra, and welcome to People IQ, where we focus on applying the Platinum Rule in your business life and personal life. The Platinum Rule is simply treating people the way they want to be treated. It's the modern-day version of winning friends and influencing people. Now, joining me today is my good friend, Scott Zimmerman. Now, Scott and I recently co-authored a book titled The Platinum Rule for Selling. And today, we're going to discuss how behavioral adaptability will help you make more sales with less effort. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you.
What led you to the Platinum Rule?
It was really some struggles I was having in my sales career. I've always been in sales, and I've always sold since I was about 24 years old. And up until recently, I always did really, really well. And about 5 years ago, there was a change in my business and my career. See, I used to sell low-cost, low-dollar, low-trust products and services. And as my business evolved, I went from selling low-cost items like graphic design, brochures, printing, and we invented a new product that was high-trust technology. It was expensive, required a lot of learning, and a lot of trust for someone to invest that money with my company. Well, my selling style that I'd learned from day one started working against me. What happened was, I guess I have a tendency to talk too fast, especially when I'm nervous or excited, probably like right now.
Yeah, and sometimes you talk too much, but that's a whole other story.
That's the kettle calling the pot black.
Okay.
And as I went out to try to sell this new technology, I was not getting any results at all. So for the longest time, I thought maybe it was the product itself. So I went through a lot of expensive sales training trying to solve the problem. I hired business coaches trying to solve the problem. And then I started reading books on my own. And your name kept coming up over and over and over in these books. And I ran across your 4-style model and eventually the Platinum Rule. And I read it. The next day, I went out and adapted my style and started getting results.
Now, let's let everybody know something about yourself and your background. I think that helps put everything in perspective. Tell us just a little bit about who you are, where you've been, what you're doing right now.
Okay. Immediately after getting out of the service at the age of 22, I started getting into sales jobs. And I stayed in sales jobs until 1991 when I started my own business. And we did graphic design, B2B marketing, and advertising. For the first 7 or 8 years, we did really well. My sales kept going up 30, 40% every year, and I was the only salesperson for the company. And again, as I said about 5 years ago, I began studying one-to-one communications and marketing. And eventually, I stumbled on and invented a system that could automate the entire process, so I went out to try to sell that. I went back to clients who already knew me and liked me and trusted me and still struggled to sell the system. And I could not understand why. It was eventually when I began learning about the 4-style model and how to slow down sometimes when I was discussing something or demonstrate more logic in my thinking or link my ideas, people began to then become receptive to the ideas that I had and see the value in the technology we had invented.
Okay. And when you got involved in the Platinum Rule, what got you to go so deeply into it as you have recently?
Well, I kind of backed into the Platinum Rule. Before discovering it, I had studied all sorts of different, I guess, like psychographics or personality types. And I'd studied the Enneagram and MBTI and the DISC model.
What's MBTI?
I believe the Myers-Briggs type indicator, and they believe on 16 personality styles. And I learned quite a bit about it, and I kept asking myself, how can you apply this in the sales process? And every one of those models are fantastic, by the way. I learned so much about myself. What I didn't learn was how to recognize another person's personality type or behavioral style and how to adapt to what I was seeing to build that immediate rapport with someone and stay connected with them as I either worked with them or tried to sell with them so that they could see the value in what we were offering. When I stumbled across the Platinum Rule in my research, it was immediate. Right away, it was not only descriptive, it told me about myself, but it's very prescriptive. In other words, it gave me that antidote, which is watch the other person's style. I believe you talk about openness versus guarded, direct versus indirect. I could learn it in a couple of hours, and literally the next day, I could go out and adapt my style to get along better with other people.
Right. Well, it's interesting that you've studied all these different styles and all these different models. What specifically led you to the model that I focus on, which is the Platinum Rule model, as opposed to some of these other more widely recognized ones like MBTI, True Colors, DISC? What led you to Platinum Rule?
Well, it was your best friend Jim Cathcart, and I had read one of his books called Relationship Selling, and the 4-style model was so clear in there, and it helped me so much that I called him to thank him. And he was so kind, he called me back, and during our discussion, he said, well, that 4-style model was also developed by my best friend, Tony Alessandra. And casually in our conversation, I had mentioned the technology that we had invented called Cyrano, and he asked me more about that. And we heard what it did in the concept of actually adapting marketing messages to match people's styles, and it was something I was working on in theory. He said, well, my friend Tony Alessandra had that idea 10 years ago. He's going to want to see what it is you've done, and that's when he introduced me to you, and that's when we started putting everything together.
Well, I know a lot of people are wondering what Cyrano is, and if you can just give, sort of a 30-second elevator description of it,
Sure.
because we're going to do another show called The Platinum Rule for Marketing, which we co-authored, and you'll get into that in much more depth. But just so that people know what Cyrano is.
All right. Cyrano is a web-based, think of it almost as a CRM on steroids. It's something we invented to overcome my shortcomings.
All right, CRM.
Contact relationship management, in other words, a place to store a database and keep all your information in one place. And being a socializer type, I'm really good at networking and meeting people and really short on follow-through. So I needed something that would automatically, after meeting someone, send them the right thing at the right time to move the relationship forward, send them messages to help them achieve goals. And so we invented a system that you could log in from the internet and it would automatically send customized emails, customized literature, even birthday gifts that match what the other person, their style.
Now, does it mail the birthday gifts too?
It absolutely will if you wanted it to. It'll send golf balls to people who golf, and it matches everything.
Excellent. So. Okay, so that's Cyrano. Now let's really dig into this application of the Platinum Rule in selling. So, sort of an overview. How does the Platinum Rule apply in selling? How do we take that concept and drill it down into the sales process?
Well, hopefully the viewers have watched some of your other shows because you talk about adaptability as everything. So there's 3 things required. You have to know yourself a little bit and your natural tendencies. So I learned that I was a socializer, and I learned about my strengths, but I also learned about some potential weaknesses. Secondarily, I learned about how to recognize someone's style. So I just watched them as I would go through the sales process. Some people have a faster pace. Some people have naturally a more slower pace. Some people are just more open to share with me their pain, problems they're having, or goals they want to achieve, and some people keep it guarded. So that's the second dimension. Know yourself, recognize another person, and the biggest one is adapt to what you're seeing. So all I had to do was to either slow down my rate of speech, maybe come across as a little more calm, depending on their demeanor, and then also shift the focus of the conversation. So by nature, I'm a very open person. So during most sales calls, I would like to talk about personal things. I talk about their hobbies, their family, how they got into business. Well, if they're a guarded person, you can see how that might create some tension.
Right.
So I shifted my pace, and I shifted the focus of the conversation, and then how I asked people questions, and it made all the difference in the world.
Well, let's take the actual selling model. Let's talk about the steps of the sale, and then we'll apply the Platinum Rule concept, the 4-style concept, to the various steps.
Okay.
So what are the steps that are covered in the Platinum Rule for selling?
Well, the first is connecting, which means you need to immediately connect with someone. Establish that rapport, lower trust. And if you can connect with someone right away, and I think when you talk about it, you say that, have you ever met someone within 5 minutes you feel like you've been best friends forever and you're just sharing freely? Well, I've learned that some people will share freely and some people won't. So when I'm connecting with someone, I'm kind of watching how they're answering questions and where they want to focus the conversation. If they're interested in talking business, I just talk business. I don't bring anything personal into it. So once you've connected with someone, you can enter the second phase.
Well, before we go
Sure.
to the second phase, on that connecting phase, I thought I heard you say lower trust, but really what you're trying to do is
increase trust.
Increase trust, lower tension.
Lower tension, increase trust.
Okay.
Again, that's a sign of nerves, so
Right.
thank you for catching that.
Okay, and this whole connecting phase sort of reminds me of a saying that I always was taught in my sales training. The very first thing you have to sell when you call on somebody is what?
Yourself.
Yourself. So this whole connecting phase is basically building that relationship, building trust, getting the person to feel comfortable with you, like you.
I think you hit both words that really sum it up, is that I've figured out that people who are naturally warm are looking for a relationship. So I look to build a little bit of a relationship before getting to business. Some people are a little more cool or a little more standoffish, and so then I go trying to build credibility and trust. Not so much a relationship, but I keep it business-like, and I might talk about some things that have some credibility behind it. Again, showing logic in my thinking.
Okay, so first step is connecting. Next step?
Exploring.
All right.
Once you've established rapport and some trust with someone and you ask the questions in a way that's pleasing to them, they will tell you their situation. So you're looking for ways that you can either solve problems for them or ways that you can improve their situation. And so by asking questions in a way that's pleasing to the other person, you begin exploring their situation. You're trying to see the world the way they see it. Problems they may be having in their business. And by the way, I'd like to interject that when I'm exploring with someone, I'm never thinking about selling them anything. I'm thinking about all the resources I have at hand that could help them, even if it's not related to something that I sell. So as I'm exploring with them, they may bring up something totally unrelated to marketing or sales or business growth. But in the back of my mind, or I make a note, it could be time management. Well, guess what? I have friends I could send them. I have articles I found I could send them. So I'm looking for things that I can help them with, because it's all about helping another person.
So helping instead of selling.
That's exactly right.
And in this whole exploring needs, you're looking for problems that you can help them solve, or
need gaps.
Need gap. A need gap is the difference between what a person's doing right now and what they should or could be doing. The smaller the need gap, if a person doesn't see a lot of change between what they're doing right now and what they could or should be doing, no need to change what they're doing, right?
But that brings in the second T of the two T's of selling that we always talk about, trust and timing.
Okay.
And so while exploring with someone, more times than not, I'm in the right place but at the wrong time. So if there's really a very small need gap, I just say to myself, no problem, there's no need here today. I'm not going to push this any further. So what I'm going to do is table the conversation, stay in contact with them in a meaningful way, and come back in a few months, 6 months. Something might change. The need gap might widen. Maybe they become more educated about something and they see the value in it. So that's how I've learned to relax during my sales calls, that I know that more often than not, I'm in the right place at the wrong time, and I just need to stay in touch with them so that when I come back to them, we can explore again and see if anything else has changed.
Okay. So it's a whole attitude in exploring needs, a whole attitude of helping instead of selling.
Yes.
A whole attitude of finding problems before you can help solve a problem. Is that right? And in this period of time where if you find that there is no need, how do you stay in touch with them?
Well, that was a loaded question, but I personally, that's why I needed Cyrano, is because I needed something that would match messages to what they were interested in, how they wanted to receive information, so that I could stay in meaningful contact over a long period of time. And if I may, could I go back just a little bit and clarify something?
All right.
I learned through other sales models and selling systems, and by the way, I recommend people learn as many as possible. You'll start seeing patterns and differentiators. But I've learned to approach people almost like a doctor would. I'm not interested in selling MRIs or splints or aspirin. I'm really interested in finding out what your pain is and if I can help you. And by taking that, I guess, objective, stand-back approach, which has I have no emotional investment in what we discover, then I found my whole demeanor came across as a lot more relaxed, more professional, and people didn't say he's trying to sell me, he's trying to help me.
Well, you're coming across more as a consultant,
Absolutely.
A counselor, so to speak.
Yes.
And how often do you stay in touch with them during this period where you did not discover need until the time where maybe you're called back in and you do the exploring needs again?
It varies. I've learned to ask a very good question of everyone that I meet, which is, I plan on finding a way to service you until I retire, and hopefully that's 20-some years away. And so I would just like to know how and how often would you like for me to stay in contact with you until you think there might be a way I can help you? And they'll tell me.
What kind of answers do you hear?
As often as you would like. What is it you wanted to send me? So eventually, or immediately, they'll go right into a question, which is, well, what were you going to send me? Is it just information? And I might say, absolutely not. You know, I might go find articles or ideas that will help you grow your business or help you solve other problems. So could we talk about that a little bit?
Interesting.
And their whole posture changes, which is, how are you going to do that? Or you'll do what? And I'm genuinely sincere about it. Tell me a little more about what you'd like to learn about or some business goals you have, and I'll go find information to help you. And that was probably the best use of Cyrano, which is being able to match information to people who have told you, I'm trying to learn about that.
Yeah.
And it can do that automatically.
Well, a very interesting and refreshing twist to this is that you are not in there just to explore the needs as it relates to your particular product or service.
Not at all.
You're in there to discover needs for your product and service and beyond.
Yes.
And it may be months, if not years, before that person does business with you. But sooner or later, do people actually do business with you?
Well, not only would they do business with me, but in the meantime, if I explore and find a need unrelated to what I do, I could refer in a trusted colleague.
Okay.
And that person goes in and solves their problem. Now imagine what that colleague may do for me someday.
Interesting.
So they have found a need that's immediate where I could fill. And of course, as you know, when you are referred in to a prospect by someone they trust and they have a need, there's not a lot of selling going on. You're really going in there and exploring and collaborating and solving their problem.
An interesting side note here is that I could almost see that some of these people, even if they're not buying from you, do any of them refer you to other people?
That's been the coolest thing of this whole concept, Tony, is that as I send out things to help people, they have never bought a thing from me. And by demonstrating that I heard them, that I cared about what they said, and that I followed through and took action on it, they will absolutely refer me to other people, and they've never bought a thing.
Interesting. Now, here's an interesting thing. You know, in selling, we frequently say that the people who are the best salespeople are the ones who have the gift of
gab.
The gift of gab, the persuasive, good talkers, good with words. But what I'm hearing you say is that your success has been to transition from that to being good at asking questions and listening.
The answer would be yes, with an asterisk. There are
Okay.
some times when, depending on their style, like a socializer, being able to get them a little bit motivated and excited about a concept absolutely works. But what I found is when to shut it down. And especially when I'm talking to a thinker or a relator, you know, there's an old saying, if you're telling, you ain't selling, and it is true now more than ever. So if I find myself going back to my natural socializer presenter mode, a little voice pops in and says, find a way to ask a smart question and let them tell you what they want.
Interesting.
And so especially with direct people, socializers and directors, I've learned one thing. Put something in front of them and say, what would you do with that? Because in that moment, I'm the second best salesperson in that conversation.
That's good. All right, so we've talked about two of the phases of the platinum rule for selling. The first one was contacting. Second was exploring. What's the next step?
Well, we also call contacting also connecting. So you contact and connecting tend to go together.
Okay.
Contacting is targeting the right prospects, sending them the right things to get you in a selling opportunity. And then once you walk in the door, you immediately connect with that person.
Okay.
They do tend to go together, by the way.
So, you know, contacting / connecting is step one. Step two is exploring needs.
Yep.
What's the next step?
Collaborating. Collaborating together. So now that I've listened to what you're trying to do, and I've listened to, maybe I've found 4 or 5 different needs or ways you'd like to improve, we start working together as a team. It's almost like I move to your side of the desk.
Interesting. Yeah, okay.
And I say, now look, there's 4 things you said you wanted to solve. And by the way, I can only help with these 2. These other 2, I'm going to get you some other help for. And we collaborate together and try to put our ideas together as a team. The old Scott, when he was struggling, would have a lot of ideas. And by the way, many of them were good. But if I say it and suggest it to you, you really don't own the idea, do you? So what I've learned to do is to ask the right questions and kind of walk the dog around the block. And after a while, they'll have that aha moment. They go, wait a minute, we could do this to fix that. And I might say, what a wonderful idea. Let's talk about that. So if I could get them to say it, they take ownership of it, and then together we actually try to poke holes in the idea or see if that boat will float. And if it's a good idea and it works, now we're working together to solve that problem.
Now, this is a real significant departure from the traditional approach of selling, because in the traditional approach, even if the salesperson incorporated the whole concept of exploring needs, and then they jumped into the next phase, which was really presenting solutions. It almost was like in the traditional approach, and yet a successful approach of selling was in exploring needs, the salesperson listens, the customer talks. In presenting solutions, the salesperson talks and the customer listens. But what I'm hearing you say is that in that model, what happens is the salesperson owns the solution, and there's not necessarily a buy-in from the customer. What you're proposing is that together, and I'm paraphrasing here, but together, the salesperson and the customer come up with options and trade-offs and potential solutions and kind of kicking the tires so that the customer helps build the solution with the salesperson, and then there's that psychological commitment to implement something that they help build.
If you help build the house, wouldn't you want to live in it? That's Absolutely. The way I look at it. And one of the things, by the way, in this book is really dovetailing off of some of your excellent books on selling. But what I like most about this book is that it talks about how to go through the 5 phases differently based on that person's style.
All right, so and I think that's one of the keys. So we're not just in this book, we're not just talking about the whole concept of connecting in general or exploring in general or now even collaborating in general. We are talking about how to apply that to each of the 4 basic patterns. Give me, again, another 30-second overview of the 4 styles that we talk about in the book.
Sure. You have the socializer, someone of my natural style who's very animated, expressive, likes to talk. And they're the most, I think, the easiest to sell to because they'll go through the process very quickly. They tend to make decisions spontaneously. So while going through the 5 phases with them, they'll just literally sprint through it with you and they don't even notice that they're doing it. One caution you might have with the socializer, they tend to buy too quickly. And myself, I once bought a car in 30 seconds because, ooh, new and shiny and a stereo. I said, write it up. Well, you can have buyer's remorse if you don't spend more time, and we'll get to the 5th phase, assuring, with that socializer. Now, directors are also what I find easy to sell to, but they used to intimidate me. Not anymore. Directors are the people in charge, fast-paced, they'll dominate the conversation. You walk in their office, they'll just tell you, hey, have a seat, what do you got? You got 3 minutes, sell me. And if you can get right to the point and lead with the biggest benefits and then say, what do you want to have happen next? Put them right back in charge of the conversation. A director will keep you around, and eventually they'll find the value in what you've got, and they'll make the buying decision.
Okay.
So when I'm collaborating and exploring with a director, it happens very quickly. They also see the value very quickly. They see benefits very quickly.
And I'm seeing that with a director, just from what I'm hearing right now, is you almost went into presenting solutions and then mixing in the exploring. So you're almost combining the 2 phases in one, exploring and collaborating, or am I missing that? With some of the other styles, there might be a very clean line of demarcation between exploring and collaborating.
Absolutely, especially with indirect people, your relators and your thinkers. And in Malcolm Gladwell's book called Blink, he talks about using orienting questions and comments. So someone who's comfortable going at a very slow, methodical pace, I will often, during the sales process, let them know right where we are and what's coming next and get a small agreement. Are you clear with what we just covered? Does that make sense to you? If it's okay, could we proceed to this? And now we're going to talk about maybe collaborating together and see if some of those needs that you have could be fixed. If we combine our ideas, would that be okay?
Okay. What about the other 2 styles? So you mentioned directors and socializers.
Right. Those are the direct people.
Okay.
People who are more indirect just have a more slower pace.
Right.
They tend to come across so much as not trying to control the conversation. They'll kind of let you lead it. So when you first meet them, they'll maybe say, welcome, would you care to have a seat? So they tend to ask more questions than they tell.
Okay.
And so you just have to kind of calm down, especially someone who's hyper.
Calm down and slow down.
Calm down and slow down.
Okay, so those 2 indirect styles, as opposed to the 2 direct ones, which were the socializers and directors, what are they? Very quickly.
You have the relators.
Okay.
And those are the really just warm people. Even in business, when they first greet you, it's a warm handshake. They just look you right in the eye, and you feel almost at home. And they are fantastic listeners. So sometimes I'd find myself carrying the conversation until I corrected myself and started asking them questions to draw things out of them.
Scott, I really appreciate this conversation here. I really do.
And that's a perfect example of a director acting like a relator.
Yeah.
And then the second style is a thinker, which is someone who's indirect, but they're also guarded.
Right.
Guarded with their thoughts, their feelings, their willingness to share information, even if it would help solve the problem. So with a thinker, you definitely don't want to come across as chummy, the traditional fast-talking salesman, because the more gift of gab you have with a thinker, the less they trust what's coming out of your mouth.
Okay, so we have 4 styles. the socializer, director, relator, thinker. The direct people, the faster-paced direct people are the directors and socializers. The slower-paced indirect people are the relators and thinkers. The more guarded, task-oriented people are the thinkers and directors. The more relationship-oriented, open people are the relators and socializers. All right, now we just have a few minutes left, so I want to get the last two phases in.
Okay.
We've talked about connecting, exploring, collaborating.
Right.
What's the next step?
It's the one that used to scare salespeople that is now gone. And there used to be that moment where after you presented, you used to have to try to close somebody and overcome their objections. And it was that moment where you'd hold your breath and ask for the sale.
All right, we call that closing the sale.
Right. I call that shovel dirt on that grave because you don't need to do that anymore.
Okay, so what are we doing here?
We're going to talk about clarifying commitments.
Okay.
If you spend a lot of time, and the majority of your time in steps 2 and 3, exploring with someone and collaborating together, the outcomes will become crystal clear. So all you have to do is clarify commitments and say, look, we talked about solving this problem, and maybe we need to support your salespeople. And together with our ideas, we came up with this, and this. Now, for this to work, you're going to have to commit to maybe this much money. Your team is going to have to go through this much training by this deadline. Now, on this side, we have to do this, and this. Now, if we're clear on that, shouldn't that get the outcome that we discussed? And it's almost just like asking a casual question, which is, now that we've clarified all this and we both agree this should solve the problem and how we're going to measure the success of that, is there any reason why we shouldn't just go ahead and get started?
Okay.
And I have found that by using this model that tension is completely gone because we're just agreeing upon everything we said needs to happen.
All right, so in this particular thing, instead of closing and overcoming objections, we're simply clarifying everything we've discussed.
All the commitments.
All the value that the customer's going to get.
How they're going to measure
How they're going to measure
success.
it. Who's going to do it by when, where,
Yes.
how, why. All right, last step now.
The most important, and it's the one that most salespeople overlook, and that's the biggest shame, and that is assuring. Assuring complete satisfaction. A lot of times a salesperson will walk out with that commitment, that purchase order, and then they go back to work and they turn that over to somebody else and they think that's the end of it, of their responsibility. Nothing could be further from the truth. So as soon as you make a sale, now it's time to make a customer, make a client for life.
Right.
And that is going back and making sure they're getting everything they should have, thanking them, keeping them informed if you're involved with training or implementation. Even if you're not, staying involved with it, making sure they're getting exactly what they're supposed to have, the way they're supposed to have it. And real quickly, I can tell you that a director's biggest fear is being taken advantage of. They don't need a thank you gift or a handwritten note, but I'll tell you what, they want to know that everything's being delivered when it was delivered, the day it was delivered, and if you miss a deadline, you better call them first. A socializer, they would love a gift and a thank you, but they also need a quick summation of what they bought, something in writing that says, you agreed